Welcome back, sewing friends. I'm wearing my jumpsuit today that I made about a month ago because we're going to make another one today. It was in last week's pattern haul. Today we're going to do McCalls 8069. It has lots of views. Actually, it has 4 different options. It's the same on top for all, but you can do a short, you can do a mid-length, it's sort of like ballet length with a cutaway leg. It's curved and it kind of opens from the knee down. Then it also has one that's just a little tiny bit longer because it has ties on the side, which is the one I'm going to do. And then finally it has a full length or pant length version. So we're going to be doing view C. It just gathers at the neck with like a little string through it, so a little string strap. And it does have a belt version if you want to, and it comes with a pocket, so we don't have to improvise our own pocket. Love it when they include a pocket in it. Let me show you our fabric. Now I bought this on Amazon. I'll leave a link down below. It's a ditzy, I believe it's called a ditzy flower print. It's just a little, almost calico looking, but it's a nice, soft, stretchy knit. This can be done in a soft woven or a knit. Whenever an option, I choose a knit, and I really like this. I bought this for another project. When I did the oceanside dress for Mom, I thought about making it for me out of this, but I think I would rather have this little romper. I need things that are comfy and cool to wear around the house, that I can wear in the garden, that I can throw over a swimsuit, and this fits the bill. And I really just love this little tie at the ankle thing. So that's our project for today. I'm going to do a true sew along. So I'm going to do my best to show you all the steps. I will be serging this together. You do not need an overlock machine or a serger, same thing, to sew this together. If you have a zigzag on your sewing machine, that's all you need to put this together. If you're using a knit, if you're using a woven, you could do the whole thing with a straight stitch and then bias binds or self bind all of your seam finishes. So you do not need a serger. Let me show you the pattern alterations. I haven't done them yet, so I can show you me doing them on camera. You may not need to do this, but I am long-waisted, and it's true even for this jumpsuit that I made. I lengthened it 2 inches, and you can see it just comes to my waist without any blouson, and it's actually a little tight. It's a little short down here. I need a little extra, and it's on the pant side because there's a waistline. There's no waist seam on this, so if I lengthen it, it doesn't really, it falls wherever it falls because there's no seam there, which kind of makes it a little easier. 2 inches front and back. They have to match at the side seam. And then I may also increase a little bit in the bum seam. We'll see. I'm going to do some measurements and see if I need to do that, just so that it hangs nicely. You don't want this pulling up in the back, making a crease in the rear end or any of those things. I want it to hang nice and soft and loose, and that way if I want to put a belt on it, it doesn't start suddenly pull weird ways. So those are the alterations we're getting ready to do now. Before we move on to doing the alteration where I'm lengthening it, I want to show you what to do with the extension pieces. If you choose to do the full length pant, there will be an extension for the front and the back. This is the front of the pattern, and this is the front extension. It has little circles. You line up the circles from one to the other. The line, everything should just line up just right. And you just tape it or pin it on. If you're taping, remember not to iron over the tape when you iron your patterns. I have the air is on right above here. It's blowing my stuff around. So let's get this lined up. You can always just use straight pins. I'm going to go ahead and tape this on, even though I'm not using this. I'm actually going to be cutting away here, but the piece will be put together. If I want to come back and do the full length pattern later, I can. Okay, so that's what you're going to do with both extensions. Just line it up and tape it on or pin it on that line before you cut. I just want you to see when adding the extension, which I'm not using, but you may be, so I want you to be aware. I have ironed this, I have taped it, I've lined it up perfectly, and you can see that the circles do not line up perfectly. This is 2A to 2, and when you get to this side, it's just off. It was also off a little bit on 1A. Really, these should line up, and they don't. So you're going to need to true this up, and truing up is, let me grab my ruler. lining up at the bottom of this and then somewhere at the top and then evening this out so that you have a smooth leg down at the bottom. So if you choose to do the longest pant length, you may have to true up a tiny bit. You can either cut away this or add a little to this corner. That's up to you. I'm, however, doing view C, so I'm going to go ahead and cut this away, but I'm going to hang on to this pattern piece. I can always tape it back on if I want to come and do the full length pant later on. You could fold it away. It's a little hard to get this curve in here, so I'm not going to try doing the folding. I'm just going to cut it off. So that's how to handle the extension. Now we're going to come up here. I'm going to flip it around for the camera. There is a length and shorten line. This is for the length of the body, from the shoulder to the crotch line. So this does not change the length of the leg. If you're all legs, this will not help you make it longer in the leg. This will only help you make it longer or shorter in the body. If you're all legs, it may be too long in the body. You may want to shorten it. This is the line you would do it on. You decide, I need to go in and shorten it an inch. You could cut it apart and move it up an inch, or you could fold it over half an inch. Because it's folded, you'll have half twice, and that would take out an inch. I need to lengthen 2 inches. So I'm actually going to cut it apart on that line. I gave it a good pressing first. I'm going to get my 2-inch ruler, which is perfect for things like this. And I'm going to go ahead and just draw 2 lines 2 inches apart. And then I'm also going to need this line here, my grain line, to make sure that I don't get this off. So I'm going to draw that also, and I want to make sure I draw it so that it's not too far to the right or to the left, sort of in the middle here. I'm going to use my actual pattern to help me. And because this ruler has all these parallel and perpendicular lines, it makes it real easy to get these straight. So this is what I'm going to be adding in to this. I'm just going to cut away some of this excess that I won't need. You just need a little bit on each side of your alteration. Now I'm going to do this for the front and the back. I actually know I need a little bit extra in the back, but if I add 3 inches in the back and 2 inches in the front, they won't meet at the side seam. The side seam measurement will be off. I'm trying to make a decision about if I'm just going to add it in the crotch wing or if I'm going to, what I need to do. So I'm going to completely cut it apart, just like that. I'm going to take this piece, and because I made all these lines, I can line it up perfectly, just like that, and tape it together. And this will give me 2 inches. Now, if I needed to take away, before I tape this, let's say you need to shorten it. Draw your line where you need to shorten it and overlap it and tape it together. Making sure to keep that grain line straight so that you don't end up with a bent or weird center back, because we want to keep that nice and straight. So that's if you need to shorten it. All right, we're going to just tape this down. I'm going to tape both of these first, then I'll come back and put more tape in, just so you can see how it's going to look and how we're going to true up the sides. Okay, so now that we're taped together, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm just going to even out where these two, on this one, because it's such a straight little pattern, I can just draw a straight line. Here we know it's a straight line, so we're just going to true up our lines. And now, this is my new pattern piece. And I've added the length that I need in the body for me. So this is the front. I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing in the back, and then I think I'm going to add a little extra here. This is the crotch wing. This is the crotch wing in the back. I'm going to extend this crotch wing just a tiny bit for me because I'm really full back there. So I'm going to do that in the crotch wing. So I'm going to go ahead and add this off camera, and then I'll show you the little crotch wing thing next. Okay, so I've added my 2 inches up here, and I've trimmed off to the pant leg that I want. And now I'm going to add a little bit on the inner back only of the crotch wing. So I'm going to add 1 inch. So you can see I've got parallel 1 inch lines here so that I can line this up right on that 1 inch line, and then I will true up everything so that I've added 1 inch out here. I'm just going to line up my 1 inch line with the outer cutting line. And because these are just straight lines and I don't have to really worry about getting this too wonky or too far off. I mainly just want to make sure that I have enough. If I had been thinking I would not have cut away this fabric over here, I would have drawn it on before I cut away. I wasn't thinking about it. So I have to tape it back on. So now I'm going to straighten out my crotch here. That gives me a little more in the rear end. Now I want to talk to you a little bit about, since I lengthened the body of this, that means that I need 2 more inches of length of fabric, because that's what I've added into the body. Now, if you don't have enough fabric, you could take the 2 inches back out of the leg to keep the pattern piece fitting the same dimension on your fabric. I'm hoping I don't have to do that. I'm hoping it fits and I can just cut it out. We will see how close I come. And again, I'm adding, whenever you add, it takes more fabric, and you may need to think about that when buying your fabric, especially if you do a pattern that needs matched, or stripe, if there's a nap where you can't flip over your pattern pieces. All right, move that out of the way. So here's my back. I've increased the body up here 2 inches, and I've given myself a little extra in the crotch wing in the back there. It still will fit perfectly when I sew front to back on that inseam. All that's going to be great, but it gives me a little more room for the booty in the back. We're now ready to cut out. Okay, let's talk about getting our grain line straight and what that means when you're working. So I'm going to show you how to do grain line. This is my back. I've got it laid out. It's folded in half. This is a 60-inch wide fabric, and I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to stick it in this grain line right here, and I'm going to measure over from that pin, exactly on that pin, to the edge of the line, okay? And it is 11.5 inches. So now I'm going to come up here and I'm going to put my ruler at 11.5 inches, and I'm going to move this until the grain line lines up perfectly. And usually, I've been doing this long enough, I almost always can get it within 1/4 inch, and I'm already just about there. So now my grain line is straight. Now it can be confusing when you've got fabric like this or a pattern piece like this. It could be easy to lay it out and be crooked like this. So if I lay this at my 11.5, now I know I need to keep bringing this in until that line meets at the 11.5, and now my grain line is straight. If you do not get your grain line straight, whether it's a woven or a knit, it's going to hang funky on you and you will be sad. So do set up the grain line to start with. Now that my grain line's straight, I'm just going to put pins on the grain line just to hold everything in place. You could lay down a weight on it. And now I can pin around the outer edge. If you've never pinned before, the best way to, I never pin across. I always pin the side, because you're going to be cutting here. You do not want to cut into a pin. So I move over so that I'm away from my cutting edge. You also don't want to over pin. The more pins, the more ripples you'll get. So you want just enough to hold everything down and to not move on you. And that's it. Just a couple pins here and there, about every 8 to 10 inches, depends on what you're working on. Now, if this were a chiffon and we're sliding all over the place, you betcha I'd be pinning a lot more. And you can also use pattern weights if it's a fabric that's stable and doesn't move on you. Now I am pinning this, but I will not cut this yet. I'm going to go ahead and roll this up to make sure I can get everything on, because you can see this pattern piece fits exactly on my cutting table and no more. So I have fabric hanging off here, and I don't know if everything's going to fit right the way I have it laid out. So I'll show you how to do it. I'm going to get all these pins in real quick. So now that that's pinned on, I come to the bottom here and I carefully fold up. And I'm not going to pull hard because this is a knit and it stretches. So we're going to slide. There we go. So we're just going to fold this up. Get one more pin in it. And I'm worrying about my two big pattern pieces. Everything else is skinny and narrow. It's a drawstring, a belt, and pocket pieces. So if I can get the two main pieces on, all the scrap around it, I can figure out for the others. And haha, it fits. I was a little concerned because I did lengthen it and it's just barely fitting on there. Let me roll it a couple more times so I can show you. And here's the top, and I have about 1 inch to spare, so it fits. The best part is I can get pockets in here, and I just need to cut 2 drawstrings. They don't have to be on the fold, so I can cut them along here, and we're good. So I'm gonna go ahead and pin both of these on. I like to go to the fold and selvage. The selvages often roll and move on you. Okay, 16 1/8. I'm gonna set my ruler at 16 1/8, and then you're now on green. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pin this down. Once this is pinned, I'll show you where I stick all the side pieces. All right, we're completely laid out. I've laid the little drawstring right here along the side. You can't see it, but there's a pocket piece traced here and a pocket piece traced here. We need 4 pocket pieces total, and since this is doubled, I get 2, 4. I have my 2 drawstring, I have my 2 fronts, I have my 2 backs. We're ready to cut. Now I have this rolled up down here at the bottom, so what I'm going to do is start cutting up here at the top, and then as I go, I will unroll to continue cutting, and we're good to go. Cutting's pretty boring, so I'm not going to make you sit and watch me cut. Remember, the more accurate you cut, the more accurate you can sew. So cut carefully. Okay, let's transfer some markings. We need to mark our pockets. If you're doing the leg that is split at the side with the little curved leg that's kind of open, you need to mark where to stop sewing to do the opening for that. We need to mark our opening in the front for the little V front. So this is how I do it. I stick a pin in it, and then I can open up my fabric and see the pin. I got my scissors holding it together, so now I can come in right where the pin comes out and I can put a little mark. And I can do it on the top and the bottom because I poked it through straight, so even when the fabric's pulled, we're good. So now I have the bottom of my pocket. I'll come up here and I'll do the same thing for the top of my pocket. If you want to mark your notches, and it's a good idea if you're a new sewist, you can cut them to the outside, but this is my little, these always will have 1/4 inch or 5/8 inch seam allowance, so you just want to do this really short and you do it straight through the middle. And you're just going to make a little tiny cut like this. You can't really see it. It doesn't take any extra effort or time. And that's my little notch. If you have a double notch, you'll do 1 in each little arrow. Here's a double notch. Pull my fabric straight again. So you're going to come in and you're going to cut through each one. Whoop, whoop. That's your double notch. We're ready to start sewing, but before we do, I just took a quick glance at the directions, which I should have done a long time ago, but really hadn't. And we do need to mark on the side of the leg where it says there's a little square to mark. And that is for the leg that is sort of scalloped or curves and cuts away, and also for the leg that ties. So if you're doing B or C, you need to mark that square. For C, we stop sewing there so that it's open so we can tie it later. You don't want to sew all the way down to the end of the tie. You could make a knot, but you can't make that cute little tie. So we're going to make sure and mark that. Mark for your pockets, mark front and back where it stops because it has a sort of V open neckline, front and back, so you need to mark that. You can always close it higher if you want to. I'll wear a t-shirt or a t-shirt or a tank top or probably a swimsuit under it, so I'm going to leave it long. I'm going to leave it open. It's easier to get on and off if it's more open because it makes the neckline open up because you step into this through that drawstring neckline. One more thing, it does have you make your own drawstring. You could do a contrast drawstring, you could do a commercial type drawstring, and you could do an elastic type drawstring if you get one that's firm enough. So those are all other options, but we're going to just do it straight like the pattern today. There are a lot of places where the seam is pressed open and stitched. So this is not one where you can just serge down every seam and be done with it. We will be serging, some of them will be serged on the outside seam allowance, some of them will be serged together if you're at the overlock. It will be the same with a sewing machine. You will be, wherever we do our serging was where we'll do our straight stitch, and then where we do a seam finish with our overlock is where you would have to do a seam finish on your sewing machine. Just a little heads up for how this is going to work. So the first thing we're going to do is take those big pattern pieces 1 and 2, and we're going to lay them on top of each other so that we have two, a right and a left. So we were matching the front to the back on the inseam, right sides together. Let me show you what it looks like. I have got a front and a back lying on top of each other and pinned at the inseam. I'm gonna have 2 of these. I went ahead and stuck a safety pin in one of the backs just because they're pretty similar front to back, and it makes it easy as you're working on it to keep track of front to back. So I have a safety pin in the middle of one of the backs at the top. I'm going to serge this if you're not serging, sew this at 5/8 of an inch, and then come back and decide how you want to seam finish. If you're using a knit, you can just do your micro zigzag along here, not a satin stitch, but a tiny zigzag on the seam line, on the 5/8 inch seam line, and you don't have to worry about seam finish because at least if you're doing this kind of knit, it doesn't fray at all. It's completely stable and you don't really need to worry about it. So I'm gonna serge both of mine. I'm sitting here at my serger and we're going to just serge this up. Now, if you're new to using an overlock and you are using it, I always, if possible, put the top or make the top piece the front, and it's just because the top of the overlock is considered the right side, and because of how you tend to press things, it puts the prettier or right side on where you want it. So make sure you pull your pins out. You do not want to stitch through a pin at the overlock, or even at the sewing machine, but really at the overlock. So we have got a nice overlocked seam, and it will look like this from the right side. I am just stitching in white for my overlock. I'm actually using a gray on the sewing machine. I did not have this exact green, and I went through all of my threads, and a lot of times grays will disappear, and the gray did. I had a perfect bluey gray that just completely disappeared. So we're going to do both legs, both inseams. 5/8 of an inch. If you're overlocking, it will cut away a portion of your seam allowance. Okay, we've got both of those sewn. Let's go look at our directions. All right, so this is what we just did. No matter what view, we've done the inseam. So now we're going to come up here and we're going to continue with this. We're going to do the crotch. So we're going to either straight stitch or serge. Now I'm going to do a little combination of things, but we're going to go from the marking where it opens in the center back, so all the way around to the marking where it opens in the center front. And then we're going to come back and trim and sew even a little closer through the crotch. You do not want a full 5/8 inch seam allowance hanging out in the crotch line. You want to get that trimmed down narrower. If you're overlocking, the width of your stitching is perfect, so just serge that off. You'll lose about a quarter of an inch. You'll have about 3/8 to a quarter of an inch seam right through that area. I want to have this area seam finished, so I'm going to, before I do this, I'm going to go to my serger and I'm going to, before these are sewn together, and I'm going to serge from here to here on all of these so that that part is seam finished for doing the next step. So I'm kind of looking ahead to see what I need to do. So I'm going to seam finish this first, then I'm going to do this seam. We marked our on our front and our back, this little red dot right there, and that's the opening for the neckline. And I'm going to go ahead using that little red dot, and I'm going to serge just on the outer edge for seam finish. All right, we're going to now pin that entire crotch line from neck all the way down to inseam and back up to the other side of the neck. Now we're not sewing that whole thing. I have it pinned up there just to hold everything together and keep it straight, but we're actually pinning, we're going to sew from the markings from our little circle in one neckline all the way around to the other circle. So if you look, here's my back. I've got back to back. Here's my inseam, and now I have front to front. So I'm going to sew on my sewing machine first all the way around on the 5/8 inch line to make sure everything's happy and lined up where it belongs, and then I'm going to come back with my serge and serge next to it. You want to make sure that you can easily fold back your 5/8 that you need for the neckline to finish off those necklines. I think it even allows enough for you to fold it twice if you don't want to have serging on the inside. You want to do a self finish where it folds twice and it's top stitch so it's self-finished. You could do that too if you want to. I'm sewing with knit. If you're sewing with a woven, you can just straight stitch this, and the directions actually show to do a second straight stitch a little closer out or a little farther out through the crotch to make it stronger. Then you can zigzag your seam finish, you can bias bind it, you have lots of options. Okay, so we're going to sew this whole seam real quick at the sewing machine. Now remember to back stitch, and when you back stitch, you don't need to back stitch 10 stitches. Just 2 is plenty, as long as you're doing a good back stitch. So I'm going to back stitch 1, 2, 3, and forward 2, 3. That's it, and now it's nice and secure. So now I have, whoops, I missed a pin. We have this whole long seam. See that? Now there's a lot of bias, especially in this area, so be careful that you don't stretch this out, whether it's woven or knit. It's easy to stretch it out. Can you see how, because of how we've sewn this, it's already wanting to open up so that we can turn this back to finish our neckline? Super easy. So now I'm going to come in and serge next to this. I'm going to start out here on the outer edge, and I'm going to take away, as I get closer, I'm going to take away a little bit. I'm going to get close to my original stitching line so that it's comfortable in the crotch. I'll show you what that looks like. It's not, when you look at it, it's going to be kind of hard to tell, other than you will see my original stitching. Because this is going to, up here, this opens up and folds back to get stitched. This little area here. See, on the inside, this is going to get stitched. That's going to be a neckline. It's important to back stitch right here because there's going to be stress on that area. That's where we're going to open it up to step into it. So back stitching is important. You also want to make sure you don't get your stitch length too short. You could end up with a hole where it pulls and stretches so much against it. If you find that it's an issue, you might do a little test run, and you might make your neck opening even a little longer. If you're a hippie like I am, if you've got a full hip line, you need more room to get in and out of that neckline. All right, I'm just going to serge for a minute, and then we'll go on to the next step. All right, so there it is. You can see it's shorter seam allowance there, wider seam allowance up here, and that's just for comfort. I want to make sure, I'm a little worried about where I've straight stitched, but I think it's going to be nice and stable. I'm double checking that it's not going to pop. That's one thing about straight stitching on a knit, is you get pop stitches sometimes. So that's completely done. Okay, I'm going to take a break and go eat lunch, and then we'll come back and go to the next step. All right, I'm back from lunch, and I just had a little thought. I sat down really quickly to look through the directions, and the next thing we're going to do is finish off the neckline and the sleeve area, or the armhole, arm's eye, of the top of the bodice. And I started serging, as you know, that opening so I could just fold it back and stitch it. But the more I look at it, the more I think I would rather fold it twice and stitch it, so have a self-enclosed opening for both the neckline and the arm. So let me take you over here and do a little close-up and show you what I'm going to do. I thought I was going to have to rip out all that serging, but I don't need to. I can just leave it in there. It's just going to be stuck on the inside, but it gives a little more stability. So Let me show you how that looks, and we're going to stitch next. All right, so we've done this, and now we're to this. So this is our little neck opening, and they're folding twice and top stitching, and then they're going to do the same thing for the sleeve opening, front and back. So you're going to have this portion up here finished for the neck and sleeve for all pieces when we're done. So here's mine. I'm just going to open it up. So here you can see where I serged it, and you could do this. You could serge it, press it back, and stitch it so you have a wide seam allowance on the inside. Or you could do it this way, which is what I've decided to do. We're folding it twice on itself and pinning it so that we can top stitch it. And you notice when I pin, I've got it to the wrong side right now. I'm going to stitch it on the right side. So when I pin it, I want to pin it so that the heads hang off, so that no matter what side I'm on, I can grab the pin to pull it out. So right here is my biggest concern. This is where I've serged up to, and I don't want that to get bunchy. So we're going to see how it looks and to see if I need to come in and do any adjustment to this little portion right here. We're going to fold it back. You do not need the serging. And you're going to fold it again and top stitch. Here's how it looks at the sewing machine. I'm stitching, here's my folded edge, so we're stitching just on the inside of that folded edge. I have engaged my even feed foot just because it makes life easier. Boop. And we're going to just stitch. And now you can kind of see. Now I'm sewing with gray, but notice how nicely it blends in. It just looks great. And that's the color, which doesn't look like this green at all, but it's one of those things where it's a trick of the eye. It looks great, blends right in. So we're going to do that for all the openings. I'm currently on the neck. I'm going to do all the necks, come in and do all the sleeves. So I'm not going to sit here and make you watch me. It's boring, but it won't take very long. You can see it's low. If you plan on wearing this alone, you might get you a cute tube top or a bralette or something to wear under it because it's low. And let me show you a little close-up of what I chose to do down here at the bottom of the neckline to keep it all flat. Because of my serging, it doesn't press open flat, so I did a little stitching across when I turned the corner, and I think it's the trick. It's the thing we need to do. So let me show you that real quick close-up. All right, here's the bottom of that line, and I sunk my needle, stitched across, and came up, and I need to fix it. It's just a little bit, I got a little wave in there, just a tiny bit right there. So I'm going to come in and fix that little spot. Though I will just tell you, you can get super nitpicky, and it's not going to matter. I'm going to wear this as a swimsuit cover-up, and in the garden, probably will never make it out in public. So I could totally just live with it if I wanted to. And here's how my thread looks and the stitching. Okay, I'm going to do the other side, and then we're going to start on the sleeve. So I've done the neckline, and I had the serging on it. I'm coming to the sleeves where I had not, or the armhole where I had not serged. So it's easier to do it at the ironing board. So I am pressing up my 1/4 inch, giving it a good press, and then I'm going to turn it again and give it a good press. It's going to make your life so much easier, whether sewing with knit or woven, to press this in first as you go, and then pin it and stitch it. I'm telling you, it's lots easier. And we are doing now, neckline was 3 and 4, 6 and 7, and then sleeves, or the armhole, was 5 and 8. So however you want to look at it, that's how we're doing it. After this, we're moving on to pocket. I'm sewing the arm, or the arm opening. So this is how it looks. It's very similar to sewing the neckline, except it's easier because we're not coming up to that seam. We're just sewing to the edge like this. Let's take another look at our directions. We have sewn everything up through step 8, And their step 9 is to start on pockets. However, if you want to, you could go ahead and start here on step 14. You do not have to have the side seams together to finish these neckline edges. And honestly, it'd probably be a little bit easier to sew them before you do the side seam. And to do this, we're going to fold under 1/4 of an inch and then fold it again to make our little casing. I'm going to see if it says there's a half, they have a whole inch allowed. So if you fold under 1/4 inch, then fold it down 3/4 of an inch. That's how big the casing is going to be. I am going to do that. So I'm going to show you how to do that next. The other thing I'm going to do in prep for pockets is I'm going to go ahead and serge this side seam on mine. Let me find the one that's, here's what the side seam of mine is going to look like. I'm going to serge the whole side seam starting from the underarm all the way down to where my little marking is to stop sewing to make the hemline. So I'm going to sew this whole little section, serge it, it's just on its own, so it's seam finished. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to go ahead and do this. So I'll show you this step next. If you're sewing along, I'm skipping and coming back to 9. So if you want to sew along with me, come back to this. It's time stamped, but I'm going to go ahead and get this part done next because it just makes sense. If you have a serger, you could totally serge this edge, then fold down an entire inch, so measure up an inch and stitch it down, and that would make your casing. However, you can also do the method where we're going to fold up 1/4 of an inch, press it, fold down 3/4 of an inch and press it, and sew that. So that's the method we're going to do. I always like to start by getting the final press, which is the 1 inch folded down first. Then I can come back and tuck this under and press it. I just think that you're more likely to get accuracy if you do that. So I'm going to fold down 1 inch on all the neckline pieces first. Make sure they line up. Make sure when I pull this up like this, pull it like this, pull it nice and straight, make sure that they line up. You do not want to finish this and have them uneven like that. You want to make sure that they're even here at the neckline. That's super important. And you also want to do the same thing front and back. So we're going to do that all the way around, and then I'm going to go ahead, turn up, press that, put some pins in it, then I'm going to flip it over and stitch it from the right side. I'm ready to start sewing in this casing. So this is how it looks from the back side. This is how it looks from the right side, and I will be stitching from the right side. We're going to try and get close to this 3/4 inch line, but not over it. We don't want to fall off. We want to make sure our casing holds. So we're going to be sewing at about the 5/8 inch all the way across. All right, this is the inside of the casing, and you want to see this. You want the inside to be a little narrower than the outside so it doesn't show through. So on the outside, you don't see the back side of that casing. See, it disappears, and you want to make sure you catch it all the way across. I did straight stitch it. It has just a tiny bit of give. I don't have to worry about it because it's the neck, but that's how it's going to look on all 4 little parts. And you want to make sure that when you're done, everything lines up and you don't end up with it crooked like that, or one sewn deep and one sewn narrow. So those are the things to look for when you're sewing. All right, we've got a lot of fabric here. Little neckline casings in, so I skipped up to this point and I went ahead and did that while it was all open and easy. I just think it's easier. All the sleeves and necklines are finished. I chose to seam finish from the bottom of the armhole to the marking, or just beyond the marking, where we're going to stop to make the little slit in the side of the leg. So that is seam finished on all parts. And I went ahead and seam finished just the straight edge of all the pocket pieces so that we can now start on the pocket. So we're going to take our pocket, we're going to find our little markings that we did on our side seam that shows the start and stop of the pocket. Make sure you hang the pocket the right direction. You don't want to sew your pocket in upside down. It should hang down. So we're going to put right sides together and pin all of our pockets on. So let me show you what that looks like. This is how it's going to look when pinned on to your side seam. There's a lot going on here, but what we've done is we've got right side pocket on, and it's lined up with our little markings. You should have pocket above and below the marking. The marking is where we're going to sew. So we're going to sew from here to here. This is left open so that we can sew it together as a pocket. So we're going to have 4 ears, 4 of these on each side seam. So here's this one, and then over here is another one. So this is my back, I believe. Let me see, I did put I put a tag in the back so I could take my safety pin out. So I know this is my back, so I'm going to go ahead and do the fronts, and then we will just straight stitch on the 5/8 inch line between the pins, or if you want to go to this side, from your pocket markings. And this is step 9 on your directions. That's what we're doing right now. So we're getting this set up under the sewing machine, right sides together on the 5/8 inch line. There's my little red marking. I'm gonna seek my needle, pull out my pin, take a couple stitches, make sure to backstitch. Pockets get a lot of wear and tear, so you want to have them stitched in well. All right, we're gonna do that 4 times. We're now ready to sew the pocket. So before we do our side seams, we're gonna do pocket only because it makes sense. It's a little easier. So we're going to pull the pocket out. We're going to lay our garment on top of itself. We're gonna put right sides together, front on top of the back. So here's my back, and it's laying on top of the front. We're gonna line up our side seam. I've gone ahead and put a pin up here at the underarm, but what we're going to do is we're actually going to grab these pocket pieces and pin them together, and you can see they're separate up here at the top. So you can easily serge around this whole pocket, right? Or straight stitch. The way I have it pinned right now, you can see I've got it flat, but you could actually fold these back, fold back the seam allowance and start that way if you want to. You could do it either way. Can you see how far down? This is where the pocket opening is. We have this much of an opening, so you can come and sew just below this so you don't end up with a little hole in your pocket. We're going to sew shut the pocket right here, and then we're going to sew around it. So let me show you how to sew it shut first. Here's our pocket. I've got the front on the back at one side seam, and what we're going to do is, see, here's where we stopped sewing, where we stitched it to the side of the garment. Now we're going to stitch pocket to pocket below that. So we're just going to go come down and sew this, because once we sew around the bottom, there's enough of a seam allowance you could have a little hole here. We don't want that, so I'm going to go ahead and just sew a little line right there. Move everything out of the way so we're only sewing pocket. 5/8 of an inch. Doesn't have to be perfect. We're just trying to keep from having, you know, change fall out of our pocket. You could also do that at the top if you want to, though it's much less likely for things to fall out of the top of your pocket than it is the bottom of your pocket. Now that we've done that, I'm just going to serge around this outer edge. You can come in and sew at 5/8 inch around that outer edge and zigzag it. It's up to you. I'm just going to serge it and gain a little extra in the pocket. I'm not worried about it. It doesn't have to be sewn at the 5/8 inch in. It just doesn't matter that much. So that's what I'm going to do. Now that we've sewn the ear of the pocket, we're going to come back and we're going to sew this section and this section. Now I think they actually, it looks like they sew down and around, and not my favorite way. You want your pocket to move more free than that. You tend to end up with a little buckle at the bottom of the pocket. It may work out for you, but a lot of times it doesn't. So here is my pocket where I've sewn, and here you can see I've gone around the pocket here. We're now going to push all of this out of the way as best we can. We can actually start right here if we want to, and sew up, all the way up to the armhole. And then we're going to do the same thing below the pocket, and we're going to stop at our little marking, And that marking is for us to be for later when we're going to hem and fix this. So you can see it's just a little short section below the pocket. The rest is all hem. So here is the underarm, sewing at 5/8 of an inch. Working our way to the pocket. Here's my pocket. So we're going to sew right up to, I'm going to get rid of my pin now. Can you see how close I'm getting to the old stitching? Everything's pulled out of the way so it doesn't get caught. And that seam is done. And now we're going to come down here below the pocket. We're going to start right there and do the same thing. All right, we have got our side seam. So I'm going to show you a side seam with the pocket sticking out. Okay, and from the inside, you can see here's our seam. Pull this out so you can see here's our pocket. And see the pocket completely disappears and there's no little bulk or bubbles. It just looks like a side seam. You can't even see the pocket in there. That's the goal. You don't want to have a little bubble or hooky-doo, that's a technical term, at the bottom of this. So that's the main thing with the pocket, getting it in even, getting it lined up. There's our ears. Okay, now let's move on to step. Okay. They have us do the neckline next, which we've already done, so we're going to now make the drawstring. All right, we're going to make our little drawstring. We're going to take pattern piece 4 and we're going to sew it together on the short end. Just pick one of the short ends. And we're going to sew that together. So let me do that real quick. Press open this little seam that you just made. So we're going to press this open. We're going to fold it in half and we're going to stitch this little snake. Now you want to leave a hole. Sometimes you'll see where they leave a hole at the end and they pull it through. It's a little hard when it's this long and this thin. It can be done. But what I would do and what the directions show is start on one side of the seam, sew across the seam to the other end, and then move down a couple of inches, just like 2. And then start on this side and sew to the other end. Now they do not show enclosing these ends, which I don't think it really matters, especially if you're using a knit. You can tie a little knot in the end, but you could sew across those ends. Since we're pulling it through the middle part, if you finish off that end, it'll just have a finished end. So you could definitely sew across the ends if you want to. So we're going to just sew this up and turn it through. It's going to be a little bit hard to turn through. You can, there's a little trick where you sew through a string on one side and pull the string through. You definitely could do that whole turning thing if you wanted to. A lot of times, as long as you have like a thin-handled wooden spoon, something like that, you can use that to help turn it. You poke it through. It's always a little bit tricky to pull something as narrow as this, and especially with a knit, because knits tend to want to stretch and move on you when you're trying to turn it and just give you a little bit more trouble for turning, but not always. So anyway, let's sew this real quick and turn it. So we have a drawstring and then we can start hemming. So we have a snake, and so here's my little seam allowance, and this is my little hole right here. There's lots of ways you can do this. I personally prefer to put a safety pin and push it through, but before we do that, you've got a heavy seam allowance in this for the size of your tube, so I would recommend trimming out a little seam allowance. So I'm going to take my scissors and just trim this down. Now you could have a wider band by doing a narrower seam allowance if you want a thicker drawstring. It'll turn better and it'll be easier if you start trimming away some of that seam allowance. So I'm going to trim all this seam allowance away real quick. I'm going to leave a little hump. Let me come up here where it is. So right here where I have the hole, the opening, I'm not going to trim away seam allowance in that one little spot so that I don't have any issues when I go to turn it to seal it shut. I don't want it to be so narrow right there that it gives me a little bit of a problem. So we're going to trim it like this. So can you see that shape? And this is where the hole is. Okay, so we're going to trim it and turn it. If this is your first time to pull through a little snake like this, you're going to put a safety pin in one corner through the little hole, so you can slide it easily, and it'll slide into the hole, and then because there's a pin there, it's easy to hold on to, and then you kind of push the pin down and gently pull the fabric up. And you're just going to keep going till you get to the hole that you left. I've already done one side. You're just going to keep fishing it through. Pardon the dog. I know you can hear her downstairs. She's got a mighty big bark. And then when you get to the hole, you just push the safety pin through the hole. So I would just keep moving the fullness down. So I'm almost to the hole. Well, I got a phone call, and when I came back, my camera died. So I'm just showing how I am pulling through each side of the tie through the little hole that I left in the middle. That's really all there is to this clip. And then once they're through, I tied knots in the end of each side on the right side, and it makes it stay in place better once it's in the casing. So that's it. I slip stitched closed the little opening where I turned it through, and we have a completed tie. So here I am just tying knots in each end. All right, on to the next part. All right, we've made our little neck band, and I went ahead and fished it through on mine, just like it shows here. And I used the safety pin to help push it through the casing. I'm not making a belt, which is another option, so I'm not even doing the belt. So now it's time to do the hem. Now for the hem that I'm doing, they show hemming the side seam and then coming back and doing the bottom hem. I will tell you that it is more flattering if you do the bottom hem first and then the side seam. Now we're tying this, so it's not going to be as noticeable. But if you were not tying this, or if you decided to leave it loose, this side right here looks really bad when you can see the bottom hem pulled up to the side. If you do it in the reverse, where you sew this first and then sew the side seam, from the side you don't see the bottom hem's little turn up, and it makes for a smooth, more attractive line. So I'm going to do like I always do. I'm going to hem the bottom first, and then I'm going to come back and do the side seam. You can do it either way. It's really up to you. This is how it looks. I've already folded up my first 1/4 of an inch, and now I'm going to fold up again. I'm pressing as I go, so you can see it stays in place pretty well pressed. I've got a hem clip on there right now. Hem clips do not love this knit. It's a little stiff for the knit, and I find that it pulls on it, so I'm not going to be using my hem clips. I'm just going to stick with ironing and pinning. So I'm going to pin all the way across, stitch it for both hems at the bottom. So this is the very bottom of the hem. So we're going to do that for both of them. All right, so I'm putting in the bottom hem at the machine. This is how it looks, and this is how it looks when it comes out. We are in the home stretch. I've already done number 27. I am now going to come back and do 26. So here's below the pocket, and we're going to be folding under. Here is how it looks on mine. Here's my pocket. Here's the seam right below the pocket, and we're going to be turning under twice like this. So we're going to, and you can see I serged part of it. I wasn't real careful because I knew it was going to get caught inside, but we're going to serge under or fold under twice, top stitch it just like we did down here. At the bottom, it's going to get folded and folded, so that's going to get stitched down, and that's our final step. So I'm going to sew this. I will tell you that up here at the top, right here, where this, where it goes into the side seam, I'm going to go ahead and do a little stitch straight across, and that's just going to hold it flat right there and just make it look tidy. You don't have to do that. You can sew it at an angle. You can just sew straight up and stop. But I am going to sew up and attach the stitching so it looks continuous. I'll show you that when I'm done. I'll give you a little close-up of it. But we're just going to roll, press, and top stitch just like we've been doing. Final hem. This is how it looks in the corner. This is the side seam, this is the bottom hem. So you can see from the side, it looks nice and smooth. From the bottom, where people usually aren't looking up from the bottom at your hem, but that's how it looks from up at the bottom. Now this is going to be tied, so we'll see it either way, but that's it. So I'm finishing up my final hem now. All right, I am coming up to the top here, and what I'm going to do is just sink and turn. Get that pin out of the way. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. That way it's even on both sides. And now I'm ready to sew down. This is such a big pant leg. There we go. Trying to make it smooth before I start stitching. There we are. Now I'm ready to sew back down the other side. And that's how it looks at the top. And this is the cute little romper. Oh yeah. Yep, I really like it. Look at the cute leg. I just did a single knot where I held them together and tied them. And for me, I really like that. Like, you could definitely tie it differently, but I like the way that's tied. I'm wearing it with a t-shirt because you can see how low it is. It would be great with the bandeau tube top type thing, or a little bralette over a swimsuit. Definitely a tank top. I just grabbed this one because it matches. I might try it on with a tank top in a minute. I've got it tied in the back. It's a little cumbersome with all my hair to get that tied. I kept tying my hair in it. I could see maybe moving the tie to the shoulder. And I might want at some point a tie belt, but honestly, this probably will never make it past my backyard. It's pretty cute. What do you think? Okay, this is not a hard project, friends. If you're a beginner sewist, not hard. Definitely one that you could tackle. I will say it's not fast because there's lots of little steps, lots of the tiny hemming where you're folding twice to hem. That's just time consuming, but not hard. I did get it all done in one day. If I were not filming this and had interruptions, it would have been about a half a day project probably for me. This is a Learn to Sew project, and it has pretty good directions and pictures for a pattern. A lot of times the patterns, they expect you to know some stuff. These Learn to Sew, they don't expect you to know too much, so they give you a little more information. Okay, now I made this with a knit, but it could be made with a woven, so I would love to know if you sew it. Leave me a comment below if you've already made this project. Are you wearing it all the time? I did add 2 inches to make it a little longer. I may not have needed to, but I think when sitting, it's definitely gonna be more comfy. Oh, it's super comfy. This is so comfortable. Wow. Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot. Definitely will be wearing this one quite a bit. May need to make a belt for it though. See you next week for another fun video.